Welcome, Dillon.
All right, thank you. Hey, everybody. Yeah, this is my only slide today. I'm going to be doing some live coding. So today I'm talking about Elm Pages 3.0, declarative server state. And I'm going to be demoing some Elm Pages 3.0 features that are very fresh. Elm Pages 3.0 itself is very fresh. It's still in alpha. And these are the most bleeding edge features, and we're going to go with a live demo of them. So let's dive in. So first of all, here's what we're going to be working on. Control our smoothies, very refreshing blend of drinks. And we've got some real data. As you can see, we've got some empty smoothie jars just waiting for some nice drinks in them. And we want to get some real data in there, some real smoothies in there. And we want not just a real data in our application, but we want real server interaction. So we're actually going to be persisting a shopping cart to a database. I have the database part. In fact, you can see we've got a list of some smoothies that we want to list out on this page right here. So we want to replace this dummy data with real data. And we're going to do that with Elm Pages 3.0. So here's a starting point for our app. So now there are a lot of Elm Pages features that I'm not going to go into because I'm focusing on one particular feature set. But with that in mind, a little audience interaction here. Does anybody have a sense of what kind of steps we would traditionally do in an Elm application when we want to pull some data from a server? What sort of wiring steps would we be doing? So what sorts of things would we be adding to our app?
An init command.
Init command, probably an HTTP request. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, someone's asking if I can make the font bigger. Absolutely. Let's see. Is that better? Let me know if you want it bigger still. Yeah. Anything else you would add? You've got the init. Decoders. Yep. We'd add some decoders. Maybe some flags. Yep. Probably some messages, right? And then an update, we'd need to handle that. We need to handle messages that come back. We'd need to add something to our model. We'd need to have probably some sort of remote data to handle the error state, the OK state, those sorts of things. So let's see if we can wire in this smoothie data that we have here from this server. And let's see which of those things show up in our application. Okay, so let's see what shows up in our model. Let's see what messages we get. Let's see what we get in init. Let's see what we get in update. Okay, so pay attention to that as we go through this talk. All right, so let's dive in. So let's get some data. So I have a few Elm GraphQL sort of request helper modules that I've defined. This is just to grab some data, like grabbing our smoothie data from the server, grabbing users, so we can start filling out some of these to-dos. So let's get started. First, let's get this smoothie data. So I have in the code, I have this to-do smoothies, which is just a hard-coded list. But let's get that as real data. So in Elm Pages, we can get data into our initial page, and this is actually going to run before init runs. So we're not going to use init, we're going to use data. And we're not going to change the model, we're going to change our type alias for data here. So what we want to get is we want smoothies here. And of course, Elm is going to tell us our data is not returning the right thing anymore. So now let's make a request to get those smoothies. Well, first of all, just to get it to stop complaining, why don't we just say like that? Okay. All right, so let's change this around a little bit. All right. So we're going to define a data source. So we're going to get our uh, smoothie selection set. This is an Elm GraphQL selection set. And I've got a helper also to get some data. I actually need to get the request time. So this is a server request parser. It allows me to respond to an incoming request, which means that I can even get things like the time that the page fetch was initiated from the user. So so I have the request time. I'm going to need to pass in the request time here. Okay, so that's compiling. We're throwing away this data here. So let's take a look at this. We want our smoothies, and we actually just want to give them to data there. Record literal is a little nicer to look at, so let's do that. Okay, nothing's going on. Why is that? Well, we haven't referenced that data anywhere. Where would we reference it? It's not in our model, it's in data, right? And also, remember we talked about remote data, the error states, the update, the message. Where are those? We don't have any of that. So do we have data or not, right? So, well, let's look at view. We've got this thing called app here. This is sort of like, you can think of it as application managed state. So because we're not managing it, we don't write a message, we don't write update. The application is managing this state for us. So let's take our to-do smoothies, and let's say app.data.smoothies. And let it live reload, and there we go. There's our data. Okay, so so for the eagle-eyed viewers who are paying attention to what we would wire up compared to a traditional application, you'll notice model, we didn't touch it. Message, we didn't add one. Update, init, unchanged. So we changed data, and we changed our data type to have smoothies, and there's no intermediary state. If there were an error, we can respond with a 500 error on the server. So those sort of error states and loading states get pulled up to the server. So we no longer have to think about those intermediary states and those loading spinners. That's also good for the user experience, because from the user experience, they get the data. They don't get a skeleton application that starts kicking off some fetch requests to begin with when the page loads. They have data as soon as they load the page. So, all right, we've got a few more to-dos here. So let's grab our username. So to-do username. All right, now username, well, do we have a user even? So I have a login screen here. It says I'm not logged in yet. And if I say login as Dillon, we're not using passwords here. It's not the most secure app. I didn't want to go to the pain of hashing passwords and stuff for now, but you could imagine doing that. So okay, so I'm logged in as somebody. What does that even mean for me to be logged in? Well, what it means is there's a cookie here, and that cookie, since Elm Pages 3.0 has access to the server, incoming server requests, and can parse that, we can access the cookie to get data like a session ID or a user ID. Also, this is signed. These are signed cookies, so that means they're tamper-proof. So you can't just go and put whatever data you want into the cookie. It needs to be signed by the server. So let's go back to our data. Look at our selection set. This is Elm GraphQL, so we can say selection set. We can pull two items together. Okay, so let's say we want go to our data type here. We want a user.
Dylan, there was a
Yes.
question here for you.
Oh, yes, thank you. I did not see that. Well, let's see. Where is the app running? Good question. Okay, yeah, so this is a great question. So the app is running, right now it's running locally with the Elm Pages dev server, but you can also deploy it to serverless functions. Elm Pages 3.0 has sort of an adapter design that allows you to target different deployment targets. So you could have you could run it on a serverless platform like Cloudflare Workers, Netlify Functions, which are serverless functions, or on something like Express. I don't have an Express server yet, but it's really the same general concept, and that's what the adapter layer is for having scripts that allow you to make it shippable on different platforms. Great question. So yeah, so this is running full stack Elm, which is one of the reasons why we can kind of reduce some of that boilerplate, because we're handling this stuff full stack and handling some of these states on the server side. Okay, so let's go back to our data. We want a user, we want smoothies. All right, so map to data. Okay, so I need a smoothie selection and I need user. A user needs a user ID. So, so how are we going to get that user ID? So we're going to need to use to fetch that session. So let's say expect session. This is a little helper I've defined here. So let's say get the user ID from the session. Let's see. Order, what am I doing wrong now? Oh yeah, that's right. User ID, request time, and session. And I'm going to need to return session request, session. User selection. Okay, so now we have a user ID. There we go. These are all very fresh designs, so hopefully some of the ergonomics can be cleaned up a little, but also it's extremely type safe. So yes, it's you know, a lot of mapping, kind of some of the stuff Eduardo talked about in his effects talk, but it's feels quite robust to work with it. So well, let's see if it compiles, it works. So let's test that out. So go to welcome to do username, and let's say it's our app data. So app manage data user.name. Hey, it got my name. Let's even see. Let's see if we log in as Jane. Hey, it knows it's Jane. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So so that's all managed through these sessions, which are stored in a session cookie. And Elm Pages has access to that. It can both set those through HTTP header responses, and it can retrieve them through the cookies header that's sent in the request from our browser. So this is able to really leverage the web platform. Also, I'm using this helper here in our data loader, so it can return this server response. And since we're saying expect session data or redirect, this is a helper I have defined here. And if it fails to get a session, or if it doesn't find that user ID key in the session, notice it's saying redirect to login. So let's test that out. So if I go to the home page, it says hello, welcome Jane Doe. Let's delete this cookie and refresh the page, and it redirects us to login. Okay, so login is Dillon. There we go.
Dillon, someone asked here
Yes.
if there was like maybe you want to read what.
Oh yes. If
Yes.
an error occurs when getting smoothies, the server is responsible of handling the error, right? Like showing an error page instead of this page. Right. So, and this is actually one of those things that is somewhat still in the alpha stage right now, is figuring out the design for that. But you'll notice that the response has these two type variables, data and error page. So the data is the data that will be available when the Elm application hydrates on the client side. So it resolves that data on the server, and it hydrates that data into the client, so it has it as live data. The error page is the types of error pages you can render. So if it were some sort of data source error, so if it were an error fetching those smoothies, and we're not handling any error cases there, then that would be a 500 error. But you can also arbitrarily render an error page. So just like you can say response.render here, you can also say response dot error page, and you can give an error page response there. And that error page is just a custom type you define, so you can have whatever data you want associated with it and render those errors however you want. And you can even customize the status codes the server is going to respond to with those. So yeah, another great question. Okay, so we've accomplished a lot already, but I promised that we were going to do real server interaction and persist real data. And we haven't done that yet. So far, we're just getting data. We're setting session data, which is interesting. And in fact, while we're at it, let's implement this sign out, since that's got a to-do next to it, and we were just working on sign in stuff. So what would that look like? So now we want to, instead of just asking the server for data, we want to tell the server to do things, right? Actions. Well, how do you do that on the web? This is something that the Remix.js team has really been popularizing these days, is using some of these core web concepts that have been around for many, many years. How do you tell a server to do something? Well, forms. That's what forms have been traditionally. And they're kind of making a comeback. And so Elm Pages 3.0 uses forms to do that. So let's do that. So let's find our to-do here. And let's delete some of this unused code here, just to make it a little easier to follow what's going on. Okay, so sign out to do. So what do we even do here? Well, I'm going to change this from a div to a form. Now, the default HTTP method for a form is get, and we don't want to get, because get is more susceptible to, you know, if you post an image, you can do a get, and if you do a get request to a sign out URL, then you can sign out a user by putting a particular image on a page. That's not good. So post is a little bit more of a secure way to do that. So we want a get form, or a post form here. And we can actually add values and name value pairs like we would do in an input field in a form, we can do that right on the button here. So let's do that. So we can say name sign out, and we can say, well, the value doesn't really matter. Just keep that empty. Okay, so when we do that, in Elm Pages 3.0, we can sort of respond to that in this action. Action looks a lot like data, except it's going to be called when we do something that's not a GET request, like a post method. So, so let's go ahead and just sign out the user session. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this as a starting point because we can use our nice little expect session or redirect here. And so user ID, request time, session. Don't need this selection set. Okay, so what we do want to do here is this session we want to be cleared out. That's all we want to do. Oh, and one more thing. Instead of rendering the page, we want to do route.redirect to the login page. Okay, so let's give it a try. And while we do that, let's take a look at the network tab. Okay, so sign out to do, and let's get rid of the to do since I think we may have just done it. Okay, so sign out to do, clear this, click sign out. What's going to happen? It redirected. How did it redirect? Well, it returned a 302 response code. So here's the form data it sent. How did it send that form data? Also, again, what messages did we add? What did we add to our model? Nothing. We're not doing anything in update. What does that mean? That means that all of these interactions are happening through passing messages to the server. The messages are the form posting things to the server and receiving responses back, like going to a new route. Now notice, this is just a regular old form, and this is just a regular old document request. So this isn't even Elm specific. This is just doing an HTTP request. Now, if we wanted to, we could actually progressively enhance this to do a client-side request. So notice it's doing these document requests. Well, now it's showing an error because my editor auto-saved. But it's doing these document requests and returning a redirect status code here and clearing out the cookies. It says we're not logged in. Well, what if we wanted to handle that without having the little spinner in the corner of our browser that happens when we're doing a document reload and do a client-side single-page app style load? Well, we can progressively enhance that with Elm Pages using this helper here. So let's try that again. I'll log in as Dillon. We're logged in. Click sign out. And we did a post, and we're logged out. So we just progressively enhanced that. It sometimes will cancel GET requests to make sure it's not getting stale data incoming after. So it's when form posts are done, it will refetch any of the data sources, like our smoothies data, in case any data changed as a result of our form action that we were posting. But if there's stale data outstanding, we don't want that to come back, and we don't want to bother waiting for it. So Elm Pages also takes care of canceling those stale GET requests for us. George is asking, would this work without any JS? Let's give it a try. Sometimes Brave doesn't disable JS properly for some reason. So let's try that in Chrome. So disable JavaScript. And if we look at the network tab, let's log in as Dillon. Hey, here's our data. And let's sign out. There we go. Notice it's doing these blue document page requests, whereas here it's doing these XHR requests. So these sort of client-side requests. So yes, it does, because it's progressively enhanced, and building on these forms, we can both reduce the boilerplate that we're building in our Elm code, but also progressively enhance these experiences. So before the JavaScript loads, if you are in the process of hydrating the application, it's still interactive. Okay, so now let's grab our shopping cart data. So we still have one more bit of data to load in here. So data, let's get our cart. And I think we're going to get a maybe cart. And so we're going to map 3. Now we're going to do cart dot select. Ooh, add item to cart. That sounds fun, but not yet. Cart dot selection. And we need the user ID. We have a cart? We do. Are we using the cart? No. Why? Because we have to-do cart. Okay, so let's replace to-do cart with app data cart. There it is, no messages. And let's do maybe with default empty. Okay, to-do cart. Are you used anymore? Yes, you are. Are you used? No. Okay, let's get rid of to-do cart. And hey, that's not a very interesting cart though. Everything is at 0, but it's honest at least. Okay, so how do we get things into the cart? That's the fun part, right? So let's try that. So let's go to our view. Okay, so just like before, to sign out, when we want to send a message to the server, not an Elm capital M MSG, but message passing in the general sense, we want to communicate an intent to the server. How do we do that? Well, we do that with a form. So, so let's add a new form. So if we look at our product view, we have these buttons here for plus and minus. Let's make the plus button do something. So again, I'm going to change this div here. Which div do I want to change? I want to change this div. I want to change that to a form. Again, we're going to do method post. And now we can't just give the button a value in this case. We need to also send an extra bit of data. What data is that? Well, what product are we looking at? So we need to send the product item ID along. So let's do that. Now, how would you do that? Well, since we need to get the data through a form, we don't want to display that in a visual form to the user. We can use a hidden form, the old school way of adding data to a form request. So let's say input, and that's going to be a type of hidden. We don't need to do any CSS. That's just going to work as is. And we can say the name is item ID. And we can say the value is UUID to string of the item dot ID. So now for this button, let's say let's add a name value pairs. So we can send data. If you press plus, we can say set quantity to, and let's say like adder.value, and I'll just say 1 for now. Although you can actually, I mean, this isn't that much harder, so let's just do this. Quantity in cart plus 1. Okay, so we already have the quantity in cart. We're displaying it there. Let's just add 1 to that. So we've got set quantity, we've got item ID, and we've got our action, and we want to deal with that. How do we do that? Well, we can say, so now let's sort of parse don't validate here a little bit. Let's add an action type and say, this is just our own custom type we're going to create for convenience. So let's say we've got a sign out, and we've got, we also want to handle, set quantity. And we're going to set the quantity to a UUID and an int. That would be nice if we could parse our incoming requests into that, but how do we get that data from the form? Well, we can actually do that with, let's just make a little, form parser here. So we'll say requests dot expect form post. And this gets like a little record that has a couple of helper functions for us. So we can say, for example, field sign out. That was the name of the attribute we had here. So what this request parser API is going to do is if it matches this field, it's going to match this just like JSON decoder is doing json.decode.oneof. We can do request.oneof. And if we get a field sign out, it's going to match. If we don't, it's going to keep trying for the next one. And we're only going to have sign out for the sign out action. So we can safely map this to sign out, our sign out action. If we do field set quantity, we want set quantity and we want item ID. So we need 2 fields here. Set quantity, item ID. Item ID and the quantity set. And that's not an int. I'm going to hack a little bit. You could imagine this being nice, or you could imagine some nice APIs to help with this. But for now, I'm just going to do toInt, and I'm going to cheat a little bit. Okay. So this is a request parser that parses into an action. So we can use this, and we can say request.map2, map it into a tuple. So now we've got both our request time here, as well as our parsed action. Okay. So what are we going to do with that parsed action? Well, if it's sign out, then we're going to do what we were doing before. If it is set quantity, item ID, and quantity, then we'll need to figure out what to do. Okay, so that's the interesting part. So what are we going to do? Well, remember we got a little preview of that cart.add to cart. So let's see if we can use that. Let's see, maybe we can reuse this guy. So it's going to be a little bit similar to this. Okay. So really what we want to do is we want to perform an action. And that action is a GraphQL mutation. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our cart. We're going to say add item to cart. We're going to add the quantity. We're going to add it for that user ID and that item ID. So user ID we already have, and item ID. And our user ID, we need to make sure we wrap it in UUID. And this is not a data source, but it's a mutation data source. Okay, so so now we can set quantity. Okay, so if it compiles, it works. Shall we try it out? Also, this is a little clunky here. What we really, let's clean this up a tiny bit. Okay, that's a little bit cleaner. All right, so let's try it out. Moment of truth. We just defined our action parsing. So we can handle both the sign out action when we click the sign up button and the plus button. So plus, moment of truth. Hey, it incremented it. Press plus again. It incremented again. Look at our shopping cart here. It went from checkout to $16. If I add a green lime, which costs $7, we're going to have 3 items in the shopping cart. Now, that's working. And that is persisting on the server. I can go to a different browser, load it up. I'm not logged in. I can log in as Dillon. And I can see my same session. I can log in as Jane. Oops. Log in as Jane. A different session. It is persisted on the server. And in full stack Elm, it is completely handling it in full stack Elm. Also, it is using secrets in Elm. So when I do mutation data source, you want to see my secrets? There it is. There's my secret. Smoothies Hasura secret. Do you think you were going to see my secrets? Not that easy. Data source.env.expect. This is part of the data source API. You can pull environment variables because it's running on the server. So this is Elm code running on the server. It has access to secrets. It is a trusted environment, unlike the client side. The client side cannot write to our database, but our Elm code that is running on the server can. It can read our secrets, it can run on the database, and it can do privileged access. And that's exactly what we're doing. So this is a full stack Elm application. Does it work without JavaScript? What do you think? Let's try it out. JavaScript is disabled. Let's add another pinkberry to Dillon's cart. It works without JavaScript. Okay, so this is all, so how is this sort of working? Well, what it's doing is it's going through, it's rerunning these requests. Every time I add, so if you look at the network tab here, this is with JavaScript enabled. If I, actually with JavaScript enabled, it is still doing a full page refresh. Now, why is that? Well, because we just wrote a vanilla form here. So if we look at our form with our quantity shows up a lot. That was a bad search term. Set quantity. Okay, so we get this this form. It's just a vanilla form. Wouldn't it be nice if it could do that without a full page refresh every time, right? And that's like, it feels a little bit slow. Well, what if we could? What if we could just add this magic message? Clear the console. No full page reload. It's doing XHR requests now. So all we had to do was ask nicely. Now it's handed off the responsibility to perform those form posts to the Elm Pages framework itself. But not only that, not only does it have the client-side form post that it's initiating and managing from Elm Pages as the framework through the client-side requests, but we can also get access to that state. So you know what would be even better than being able to do these without a full page reload, these requests to update items in the cart? What if we could optimistically see it before it finished persisting that to the database, to the backend? Well, let's see if we can do that. So we've got this magic little app state here, right? The app state. Now, notice this whole time, our poor little model is sitting there empty. Message, update in it. We haven't touched them, right? So now, but don't feel too bad. We are using messages. We are using updates. It's just managed by Elm Pages, right? That the Elm Pages framework is passing things in. It has the application context, and that's exactly where this app state comes from, right? This is app state that's managed by the Elm Pages framework for us. It's it's kind of giving us a little extra state that we don't have to deal with and manage. And it understands these core web concepts like forms, so it can give us some nice helpers for that. So, okay, so how would we do this? So, all right, I don't want to go too long here, so I may cheat a tiny little bit here. So let's find these values. So pending items. And I might have defined this differently. This is quantity, item ID, and quantity to set quantity. So pending items. So we've got this app.fetchers. These are the in-flight form posts that are happening. Now, I didn't go into this because it's just a lot of information, and I know there will be questions. If you have questions, go to the Elm Pages channel on Slack, and I would love to answer these things more in depth. There's a lot that we've covered already, and we haven't even covered everything about Elm Pages 3.0. But we've got these fetchers. You can have multiple in-flight form posts. This is inspired by the remix concept of fetchers. So if we take these pending items, we've now got this pending item state. We've got a cart with pending. So we're saying if there's an in-flight form post with that has fields item ID and set quantity, let's take that item ID and let's update our shopping cart state with that pending item that we've sort of pulled out of the pending request, right? So pending items, cart with pending. So we're sort of updating the quantities in this shopping cart. So we're deriving the state from these in-flight fetchers. So where's this shopping cart? So we've got our app.data.cart. We don't want to use that anymore. We want to use our cart with pending. So let's pass that around instead of our shopping cart. And same with our totals. So we want to derive that state and include our in-flight state in there. Okay. So let's give it a go. So click plus, boom, immediately reflected. Let's go on slow 3G and watch the network tab. Okay, so I'm going to click 3, 2, 1, click this, and it just finished the update. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, click. It just finished the update.
Dylan, one
Yes.
question. What if you optimistically change it wrong? Like if you passed like a wrong value on the client side update?
Meaning if you send form data that it doesn't know how to handle on the back end?
No. For instance, like I'm setting quantity, like
Yeah.
I'm sending the message as usual and like the proper one,
Right.
but my like client side handler is optimistically like adding 2 instead of 1. Like, would it get like corrected once I actually got the final message back from the server?
Right. It will. Now, ideally, the way I think about it, if you are deriving this state, there are fewer things that can go wrong, right? And so that's why I'm calling this declarative server state, because it's declarative, not imperative. When it's imperative, you're saying, when this happens, add this to the model. When the server response comes back, take it away, take away the pending shopping cart addition, and say that change the state from loading to not, and remove this loading spinner. And there are more things that you can get wrong. There are more things to test. But when it's declarative, you're parsing it from that. And in fact, you can even share logic for parsing things in your server action where you're responding to the form posts, and the logic for parsing out the actions in your optimistic UI state that you show in your view when you have pending requests. So there's less that can go wrong. That's one thing. But another thing, let's take a look at what's actually going on in our view. So let's just add a pre-tag with our app.fetchers. Hopefully it doesn't stretch too far. Sometimes I think it might be like a lot of data because it has the entire payload of the form post. But let's see what that looks like. So if I have something kicking off here, but you can see it. Actually, let's slow it down a little bit. Let's throttle this. And so if I kick this off, let's see, we can't quite see it because it's off the screen. I never know how to make things wrap the way I want to, but fetcher loading, and let's see. So fetcher submitting, fetcher loading. I don't know if you caught it there, but we could just barely see fetcher submitting, fetcher loading. So the state will go from fetcher submitting. We have that optimistic UI to fetcher loading. Then we have the fetcher loading, which means it's key. So it does a post request, right? So if we look at this in the network tab, we can see this set quantity requests, and we can see it did an HTTP post to that form, and then it immediately goes and does a GET request. So to answer your question, George, it will indeed make sure the data is up to date by refetching all of the pages data, all of the smoothies, all of the shopping cart and the user. So if anything has changed, it gets it fresh after an action has been completed. So yeah, that's the demo. I'm sure there are a million questions. I know this was a lot, so thank you for bearing with me, and please, I'll ask what questions I can now, and for any additional questions, I'm very happy to answer questions online on Slack or on Twitter. So feel free to reach out to me there as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. I'm sure there are a lot of folks wanting to ask you questions now. I have a ton, but I'm gonna give them the chance. Please, who wants to ask something?
Yeah, I also haven't been keeping up with the chat as I gave the talk, so let's see.
There are some there already.
Let's see. Okay, so are you planning to leverage some sort of high-level API to hide the HTML form trick in the view? So let's see, to hide the form trick. So Yeah, it's a good question. If I'm understanding it correctly, well, so I definitely do, in a way, I like having it be transparent that it's just a form, and I also like it being um, easily interchangeable to be able to just write a form and then say, oh, I'm going to add this attribute to it. And that's going to allow Elm Pages to take over the client side form submissions for you. I do like that a lot. On the other hand, as you sort of saw, it's a little bit cumbersome to do these like adder name, adder value, adder name, adder value. Make sure you got these things right. Adder.method post. And I could definitely imagine APIs for cleaning that up a little and making that more high level. So now I am also experimenting with some APIs for being able to like have like a big part of Elm Pages 3.0 is not just full stack Elm, but having a nice path for incremental enhancement and progressive enhancement. I think those things go hand in hand. So like you should be able to build out an experience where you're not writing all the features at once, but you're also not painting yourself into a corner where you're getting stuck because you architect it one way and now you can't make a nice dynamic interactive experience because you started with a form. So, I'm definitely thinking about APIs where you could like incrementally enhance it one step further to client-side validations, and that's a big thing on my mind. It's a big area because client-side form validation is just a huge task. I've got an experimental API with it, but it's like very, very experimental and will probably change a lot before it ever reaches production. Okay, any other questions? Let's see, can anybody help me wrangle some of these questions here? There's a lot in the chat.
Yeah, Marcio asked you how easy it was to create, how easy it is to create automated tests for all of this.
Right.
How difficult it was to use the Elm on the back end. Like, what was the experience like building all of this?
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, Marcio, you're asking about how easy it was for me to write automated tests for the framework part of this. I might be misunderstanding there. It was difficult. I used Elm program test for a lot of the internals, a lot of the data source logic. The data sources, I didn't really go into a lot about data sources, but data sources are a lot more than just HTTP requests. Like you can do things like reading from files, getting environment variables, and even running JavaScript code. So you can have a right now I would call them a port data source. I've been thinking about calling it like a custom data source, but it allows you to get arbitrary JSON values back by executing JavaScript as a data source, right? So similar to like how you can read a file and get back data, you could say run this JavaScript function and get back JSON data. That's quite difficult. Oh, and so you're saying how difficult is it for Elm Pages users to write tests? So this is also something I've been exploring. So I have again a very experimental prototype, which probably won't make it in the 3.0 release, but I have an experimental prototype for an API to mock out data sources in like an Elm program test. But in my exploration of doing automated testing for Elm Pages 3.0, I ran into a bit of a wall with the Elm HTML testing library because it doesn't allow me to like go in and access HTML attributes, and therefore I wasn't able to like make a pull request to Elm program test to enable it to emulate form posts, form submissions. And I think that would be really cool. I could potentially just say it's not going to emulate vanilla form posts. You have to do a progressively enhanced form where it's managed by the client side state. But it's a tricky area. So I guess the answer is it depends on like how ambitious you want to be. But I do have a prototype for mocking out data from data sources. So you could say mock out the data that you get for the smoothies listing and the getting the user and that sort of thing. And how difficult was it to use Elm on the back end? Right. So it's very exciting. I mean, I'm just beginning to really scratch the surface with this. You know, as you can see, like it's pretty neat to be able to not just get data from Elm, but add things to a shopping cart and place an order and things like that. So I'd say it depends on the APIs that are available. With Elm GraphQL, it definitely is at the moment pretty difficult to build up input objects in your selection sets. You can see some of these like get deeply nested with this sort of optional argument pattern. There may be, you know, I know that some of the people at Vendor, formerly Blissfully, are working on some designs to make the process, you know, GraphQL APIs in Elm nicer in that sense, using the Phantom Builder pattern. But if you've got a nice way to send stuff to the backend from Elm, then it's quite nice working with Elm full stack with this data source abstraction, because you can, again, like get secrets. Like I showed this sort of like with these key building blocks, like being able to get a secret and use that, right? So if you want to send an email, in fact, like Martin Stewart even has like a SendGrid API, right? So if you want to like send an email, you're going to need to be able to get like your secrets, but you can do that, and you can just say send an email in response to this. If you want to get a user session, you can just do that. If you want to redirect, if you want to say this state is not like persist this state through sessions, you can do those things with Elm Pages. So I'd say the experience is mixed in that sense, right? There are not a ton of like tools designed for doing backend heavy things, but at the same time, like a lot of the building blocks that Elm Pages gives you, and using these sort of web fundamentals of using form posts to respond to these actions, and using session cookies to manage sessions. It's a mixed bag, but I've been having a lot of fun with it.
Dylan, I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know that you are using Lambda in some way to deal with parts of this, right? Like the actual like sending type safe data like across those boundaries.
Yeah.
And I wonder if like you're basically creating a platform, right? Like similar to Rocks in some way, that you are running all of this in the backend. And I wonder if like there is any way for user-defined like data passing, because like I can think of that maybe the only bottleneck that I can see for using this in like any case would be like if there's a lot of data translation, right? Like decoding and encoding, it might be kind of the Achilles heels of DevOps. Like I'm not saying that it would be impossible, but like it's the only glue code that is still there, like in this whole setup, right? Like I wonder if there's any way for the end user to also define this way to get data inside Elm directly in some way. I don't know.
Translating the data from where to where? You mean from like a backend, like a persistent backend?
Like if I get data from the database, it's still like data outside Elm, right? Like I have to parse it somehow. I don't know if the way that you deal with Lambda, it bypasses this in any way or not. I'm not sure.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So so to clarify, you know, the Lambda piece of Elm Pages, Mario has very generously worked with me to we're, I think, mutual fans of like we kind of follow the progress on. I follow Lambdera closely. He follows Elm Pages closely. We sort of like chat about the designs and say like, oh, cool. I need to learn from this feature. And but so he very generously worked with me so I could integrate the Lambdera compiler to use its automatic type serialization, and that's how it's getting these the smoothie data. So we sort of glossed over it, but it's actually having an interactive client-side Elm application where it resolves data on the server, right? Because we have, I mean, again, we're using secrets to access this. We're using a user session that we're getting from a cookie and checking against the database and using secrets to read, right? Where anytime we're hitting the Hasura database, we're using an environment variable secret. So it's very much running on the server and it's resolving that data, and this data right here is being resolved on the server. But then it hydrates into an interactive Elm application. So it exists on the client side. So how does it do that? That's Lambdera. So it uses Lambdera to automatically serialize this data. You can actually see it. If we if I add an item to the cart, we can actually see it right here. So here's all of the data in binary form. There's my name, Dillon Kearns. There's some image URLs. So this is byte encoded data. And that's thanks to Lambdera. The Lambdera compiler gives us that automatic serialization. But that's the only piece of Lambdera it uses. So it uses the Lambdera compiler instead of the Elm compiler. Now, it would be really cool if you could like hook into a Lambdera persistence layer, Lambdera backend, so you could like, I mean, Lambdera is a different model. It's sort of like these dynamic real-time applications, and Elm Pages that's not really what it's about. It's more about server rendered pages. I didn't even show it, but if you look at like the SEO data, like if you share a link to this on Slack, then you get this nice preview image because it's pre-rendering the HTML. We saw it working with JavaScript turned off, right? It's sending fully rendered HTML pages every time. So those are the sorts of things that Elm Pages excels at, and also using these building blocks of web fundamentals like forms, and progressively enhancing those experiences. But yeah, I think it could be really interesting if you could like hook into Lambdera as a persistence layer and get some of these Elm Pages things. I'm not sure what that would look like, but that's definitely an interesting possibility. But I think, I don't know, it'll be cool to see what emerges and what people come up with to sort of, I'm sure knowing the Elm community, people will find type safe ways to interact with backends with this full stack Elm stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lilo. Does anyone have any like final question?